Oh, wait, here we go. Yep, we are live. After all that. So, g'day, mate. Luke Ford here with Halsey English. It's been a while since we spoke. Very exciting election. We've got a lot going on in Israel. Halsey, let's talk about America's election. Was this an expected result to you, Donald Trump winning?
I think it was unexpected in that I thought they were going to cheat, but I think that it just was in a position where they couldn't cheat, or as I was saying for years now, that they want him to win. They know that things are in an absolute mess, and if he'll fix it, and they'll be able to run on, you know,
To you,
giving
Donald
more
Trump
shit
winning?
away, I think it was
Or
they'll be able to blame him if things go really sideways.
so wait, are you saying that they deliberately did not compete 100% in this election?
Bro, she didn't give interviews. She didn't do anything. Like she spent $1 billion and accomplished nothing. Like the fact that the country went so hard towards Trump when supposedly they went so hard against him 4 years ago, it doesn't make sense on a level that it should. And I have a feeling that whoever the powers that be realized that this wasn't going to be something that they were worth expanding their cheating system for. I don't think that they realized that this is something that's going to be good. And when all's said and done, they just decided to let it happen. And as I said, they're going to gear up for the next 2 to 4 years.
Okay, and this is based on your conviction that the 2020 election was stolen.
Stolen, yes and no. I don't really like I don't have an opinion so much on like how was it stolen. It was stolen in that before the election even started, the fix was in. Like the thing with Hunter Biden's laptop and the social media suppression and the media, kind of getting involved in what places they way shouldn't. That was the cheating. To me, like the ballot dumps in the middle of the night or anything like that. Okay, maybe that happened, maybe it didn't. Apparently there wasn't enough evidence for anybody to be able to prove it in the court of law. And when all was said and done, January 20th, Biden was sworn in. So was there cheating to the point where it affected the election? Maybe, but there's no use arguing that.
Okay, so were you surprised that Donald Trump was able to overcome so many obstacles from the lawfare, the convictions in New York, the assassination attempts, the uniform nature of the elite news media and its unfair coverage of him? Did it surprise you how he was able to overcome all of that?
I'm surprised that all of those things helped him as much as they did. Like they've been persecuting this man for even when he was in office, they impeached him twice. I think that when you work that hard to destroy somebody, people pay more attention and go, "Okay, why is this happening?" And when you did that with Trump, you found out like, okay, they didn't really have much of a case. They've never had a case for impeachment, and they're doing stuff that everybody's doing. So I think that all of these things combined, I mean, granted, the assassination attempt, they tried to kill him 3 times. I think all of those things combine to change the dynamic on everything. Because if they were really caring about the country, their outrage that Trump was almost assassinated 3 times should have been through the roof, but it wasn't. They were like, "Oh, yeah, that sucks. There's no place for violence, and besides, Trump is the one who instigates violence anyway." I think they overplayed every single hand they have, which makes me think that there was some level of deliberation to it.
And who would you say the most powerful people behind the Democratic Party and its strategies?
I would say Obama is pretty high up there. Um, I think, yeah, I think it's basically like the Obama crew. I don't know if it's necessarily just Obama, but I think that they believed they were pulling the strings and that they would be able at some point to replicate his success without him. And I don't think that that's been doable. I'm also reading reports that Biden wasn't going to let it happen.
Biden wasn't going to let it happen.
that supposedly, like, there's been a couple people that said that Pelosi and Obama and all them, they wanted an open primary. They didn't want Kamala to be the chosen one. It was that Biden came out and endorsed her like half an hour after he said he wasn't running anymore, that they basically had to accept it, or accept that there was going to be kind of a war that would undercut everything. So I think that there was enough people who didn't care about her enough, and didn't care about winning enough, and didn't care about the damage it would do to the reputation of people like Obama and Pelosi and all them. Like, this was hers to lose, everything about it. So I think that she takes the L. I don't think anybody else takes the L, except for her and maybe Tim Walz. And I think they're going to just move on. They're going to be really quiet right up until Trump starts signing executive orders and starts proposing legislation, or starts nominating people. And then I think that we're going to see the full libtard hysteria build right back up.
Have you been surprised how quiet they've been? I'm definitely surprised that there was just a muted feeling in Los Angeles, a muted feeling in New York, from what I can detect. I'm surprised by how quiet the left has been in reaction to this.
Because they know that any argument they have against Trump, with the exception of that, like, he's basically Hitler. Like, if they try to use it, like the first time it was, well, he didn't win the popular vote, and there may have been Russian involvement and all of this stuff. He won so overwhelmingly that I don't think they have much of a case, and they're not going to be able to make the case to the nation that it's okay that people are burning down cities and rioting, when they don't seem to have a legitimate argument other than the fact they don't like the guy. And I don't think, again, we're talking about political capital, that if they really want to destroy themselves, they'll allow people to riot and people to go crazy, and whip everyone up into a frenzy right now, at a time where even Democrats understand that they lost because Kamala sucks, not because people just resoundingly, rejected the Democratic Party.
So what kind of score would you overall give to Donald Trump first term? I would give him a B.
I'd probably be more at a C, just because I think Trump's first term. Let me back up for a sec. Number one, I don't hold Trump as this like kind of God king, right?
Right.
Trump is a buffoon. That's what he's
Yeah.
always been. But he's our buffoon.
Yeah.
Like, he's an entertainer. He knows how to like get shit done. And I think that his first term, he was a believer in the system. He believed that he won. He defeated Hillary, which was a huge feat. And now the rest of the Democratic Party would in some way work with him to make sure that things got better, right? Because that's a courtesy that people extend to people all the time. And I mean, Newt Gingrich worked with Bill Clinton. The Republicans worked with Obama to some extent. Like, there was always animosity, but there was never just outright hatred. And I think that he believed that if he moderated to a bit, if he didn't go after Hillary, if he proposed things that people generally could get behind, that they would work with him to a point where he would have a good enough record that he could sit back and be comfortable with it. They went so hysterical and gave him nothing. Like, even the Republicans gave him nothing. I mean, how many years did they run on the whole point was they were going to repeal Obamacare? The minute they
10
had the
months.
House and
10
Senate,
months. Yeah. 10 months they put
yeah.
into that.
And then the minute they had the House, Senate, and presidency, John McCain came out and said, "Yeah, we can't do that," and it was all over. I think that he was floored at the amount of obstruction he faced from the entire government, from the bureaucracy to the Democrats to the rhinos to everybody. And I think he still believed that when all was said and done, he was going to run for reelection. He would probably win, and maybe he would be a little more, you know, uncompromising. But then they destroyed him. They impeached him again. They started throwing all his supporters in jail with what's it called? With January
Lawfare.
6th.
Yeah. January 6th. Yeah.
They went after him in a way. They brought up how many court cases against him that were obviously based on nothing.
Four.
Like, they went after him in a way that I don't think even he could have been prepared for mentally. And so I think his first term was a C because he really believed that he could work with them on getting at least proposals they agreed with through and passed. And then what they've done to him over the last 4 years, culminating with them trying to kill him, I think he's much more clear-headed as to what it's gonna take this time, and he's gonna be a lot more cautious about the people he brings into his inner circle, and I have a much higher expectation for what he can accomplish over the next 4 years than I did in the previous.
Okay, so last time I spoke to you, we didn't have a good connection. I don't want you to reveal anything personally that's too personal, but give me an overview of where you've been vis-a-vis politics and live streaming and political debate the last 4 years.
I mean, I went through some really, really tough financial times, which everyone knows about. I was pretty open about it. I was involved in the crypto market, and there was some thievery and some general bad shit. And I spent like basically a couple years really getting like I spent it working and trying to get back on my feet and going through some personal drama and all that. And it streaming took a back seat because I didn't feel that I was A, paying attention enough, and B, that I was committed enough to continue doing what I do. Because what I do is I get into politics, I get into relationships, I get into religion, I get into kind of more intellectual pursuits, even if you consider like yelling at alt-righters to be somewhat intellectual. And the only thing that was going on at the time was that there seemed to be a lot of like internet drama of this one hates this one, and this one screwed over this one, and all these personalities were just crashing and burning, or some people were rising, some people were falling. I couldn't even keep up with it anymore. So every time I went on, I would go on a live stream. Other than I never stopped doing the Wednesday morning show with TFM that I enjoyed. TFM's my friend, even if we disagree pretty heavily on like porn and sex bots and all that kind of stuff. Our friendship isn't based on us agreeing on those kind of things. It's based on that we have a lot of shared visions in politics, and we like having a male space where we can talk about it. So I never stopped doing that, but I felt like I wasn't involved enough with the culture going on in the world to really start commenting on all of the crap that people were asking me. And I didn't wanna be that guy who takes sides without figuring out, like, what's going on, and then just constantly saying, "Well, I was wrong about this one," or "I was wrong about that one," or "Man, I screwed up that," or I wanted to get my head clear, and me taking a week off turned into a month, turned into 6 months, turned into a year, and it was very nice to be away, you know? And then things started getting to a point where I felt like, "You know what? I do have something to say again." And so I started streaming again, and I'm enjoying it again, but I'm not again, I'm not getting involved in the drama of the internet. I don't really care about what people on like the alt-right say, or people what like that are neo-Nazis. Like I really don't. I don't need to have those discussions anymore. As far as I'm concerned, everything I've needed to say to those people has been said, and they've all melted down to a point of just complete obscurity, which is something, by the way, I always said they would. And I don't feel like, even though you could probably say that Nick Fuentes is like more popular now than he used to be, like it doesn't matter. Nobody takes him seriously. Like the one time he went anywhere near Trump, people fell over themselves to just talk about what a moron he was. And then he got involved with Kanye West and like all this. So like even the ones that still maintain some level of popularity are just nothing fed working losers. So now I'm talking about things that I consider more my style. I'm talking about politics again. I'm talking about human relationships again. I'm talking about religion a lot. I talk about the things that, like tonight I'm doing a show. I was actually going to ask you about this. Like I'm doing a show where we're going to talk about the effect of porn on the country, right? Or the world. I don't have any solutions. I just know it's bad. And I just know it's not something I'm into. But the more people I talk to, the more I'm starting to hear, instead of people going like, "Oh, instead of going after porn, you should go after women or black people or Jews or, Democrats or whatever it is." But people are like really starting to wake up to the idea that like, well, maybe it is the porn. Maybe like we've created a society where people can't date anymore and that people are just, fapping to porn all the time and wrecking their brains. So I enjoy those type of conversations more than I do just trying to blame mass groups of people for stupid crap that they probably don't have that much of an influence over one way or the other.
Okay, let me focus on one thing that you just said, and I'm going to answer my own question first and then throw the question to you. You said about figuring out what's going on before you give an opinion. So here's my process for figuring out what's going on before I give my opinion. I compare my firsthand direct experience with what are the dominant narratives with regard to whatever I experience. So I experience life with different types of people, and I notice that out in the real world, that different groups of people tend to have different gifts. That the gifts of Ashkenazi Jews tend to be different from the gifts of people of West African origin, who in turn tend to have different gifts than people of East African origin. So
Sure.
I take my firsthand experience, I compare it with what are the dominant narratives, and then I tried to figure out why my firsthand experience is so different from the dominant narratives. And if it is quite different, then I try to explain why I think the dominant narratives are inadequate. And then a second way that I try to figure out what's going on, let's take something like voter fraud. I have no firsthand experience of voter fraud. So I have to entirely depend upon other sources of information. So what I try to do is I try to take the best sources of information on the topic. And so most of them have been written by people left of center. And so I read a couple of books on voter fraud, and then I compare them to the best of the pro voter fraud crowd essays that I've read. And I compared the two. And to me, the left wing dominant academic accounts appeared far more persuasive than the rabble rousing right wing talk radio accounts. So those are two ways that I figure things out. One, through my own direct experience, and then compare it with the dominant narratives. Two, if I have no direct experience, I try to read the best of each side. I'll try to read the best left wing perspective, the best right wing perspective, and then see if I can figure out which makes more sense. And I will sometimes side with the left wing perspective. I'll side with the left wing perspective on voter fraud, and I will side with the left wing perspective on COVID. I think by and large, that public health officials and our politicians and our systems did a better than average job with regard to COVID. The very unpopular perspective, virtually nobody agrees with me in my chat, but I think vaccination is good. I think that social distancing was the right thing to do in the first few weeks of the epidemic. I'm not here to argue COVID, though I'm happy to, but I'm just explaining my process for trying to figure things out. How would you describe your process for figuring things out?
Okay, so you just unloaded a lot that I have to address. So, as far as COVID goes, I don't know what the right or wrong thing to do was because at this point it's all Monday morning quarterbacking. Like if we could all say, okay, they shouldn't have told people to socially distance. They shouldn't have pushed a experimental vaccine, right? We can say all of that, but we're doing that with hindsight. And some things carried on much longer than they should have? I think so. Were things pushed a little harder than they should have been? I think so. Were certain things discounted that probably should have been taken more into account? I think so. But again, you can't really understand what's going on when people are in the heat of something. Like Trump has always been kind of like more on the anti-vaccine side than ever, and he was the one in charge of the whole COVID response for what, over a year or two. Like
Yeah.
we weren't acting with the information they had. We weren't acting with the background they had. We weren't acting with the knowledge that people go, oh, they locked down the whole country. Well, actually, they kind of didn't. It was more like the real hardcore Democratic cities that did. It's just that's where the bulk of the population is. So more people felt it than they did throughout the entire rest of the country. And there were a lot of people complaining about it. And there was plenty of hypocrisy to go around. But when is there not? Like okay, so yes, they allowed Hollywood movies to get together and have lunch tables in the parking lot of restaurants that they wouldn't allow to open because people weren't allowed to come in and mix together. Is that hypocrisy? Of course it is. But as I said, no one gets everything right, and could possibly think that a nationwide response to something could just go off without a hitch. So whatever happened happened, and if we're going to sit here and just second guess it forever, then you're missing the point. The point should be that if it comes down to another pandemic, whether real or whatever comes out, that hopefully they'll have refined their responses and learned from the last one on what is and isn't the appropriate things to do when facing, a threat of a biological nature. So, does that mean I have faith in politicians? I've never had faith in politicians. That's why I lean more libertarian than most, because I don't believe the government is very good at responding to things. And I think when they are, it's the more localized responses that are probably the best. But does that make me left wing or right wing? I don't think it makes me anything. Like, do I agree with these people who are like advertising themselves to like other people, like, hey, I'm vaccine free, so my sperm is better than other people's, like hook up with me. Like, I think that's silly. And I think the people that are still claiming that the mRNA vaccine was God's gift to the earth, I think are also silly because it hasn't proven that effective. So I think that COVID was a really good learning experience, not just for the government, but for our communities on how we should treat each other and what we should do in response to these kind of things, and what we should accept and what we shouldn't accept from government and from private organizations. But I don't want to start worrying myself with, okay, well, they did a really shitty job last time. Like, okay, I can accept that. Let's move on. Like, there's no reason to sit here and dwell on whether they did a shitty job or not, because even if we do argue about it, we're not gonna come to a solution. It's not like you're gonna go, "Oh, wow, I didn't consider what you were talking about. You're right, it was a really shitty response." And it's not like I'm gonna come to you and you're gonna say and I'm gonna say like, "Oh, wow, you made a persuasive argument. Like, I think it was the best response ever made." I think that people's opinions are going to be their opinions, and I think people are going to judge things based on their own personal experiences towards them. So, again, I don't see these kind of things as like a left or a right thing. I think that I'd call out anybody that I think did a bad job when it came to that. Secondly, you were saying that like when an issue comes to you, and this is probably going to fuck with you a little bit that I'm saying this, but when an issue comes to you, you look at sources and you're not super familiar with it. You look at sources here and sources there, and you try to read as much as you can about it to come up with an opinion based on information available, right? I always used
Yeah.
to do that too. And that it worked for me to a point. But I was also one of those people who was amazed at how science kept proving the Torah true, right? That things that have been said for thousands of years were proven by science now, and we just are looking back like, oh wow, that's a coincidence that it was done. Now I do the opposite. I look at the Torah is truth, and the world is guided by God. So knowing those two things, the things that come afterwards, they're either in line with what all of the history of religion has pointed to, or they're not. So for me, like I used to learn Torah like maybe once or twice a week, right? For maybe half an hour at a time, mostly like on Shabbos or at a Chag or something like that, or like I had like a study session with a friend every now and then. Like now I'm up to like 3 4 hours a day, and it's kind of where I center myself on everything. So I don't have to sit here and concern myself like, okay, the Hamas attacked Israel, and Israel is responding, and if America doesn't support Israel, then Hamas is going to win, and if Hamas wins, then all the Jews are going to die, and Israel's going to be destroyed, and you're never going to hear about Jews ever again. Like, no, I don't believe that. I believe that God runs the world, and that if October 7th happened, it happened for a reason. I think we should be looking into why it happened, and I think there have been plenty of really high level rabbis that have done a decent job at explaining it. I think the response is guided by God. I think that what we're seeing are people that are responding to things in the method of history, and you'll see over and over and over again these same things keep wind up happening. So, like, again, I don't know anything about porn. I think I've watched porn twice in my life, right? I don't get it. I personally just, like, people say, "Oh, I know it's bad, so I don't watch it." I don't know if it's good or bad. I just always say to myself that why, if I was really hungry, would I watch the Food Network? I've never understood the purpose of watching a screen with other people fucking. I've never got that. And that's fine. I'm not saying everybody should look at things my way. I'm saying that's how I look at it. So I don't really get it. But I look at that over and over and over. The Torah talks about sexual morality and how not adhering to some form of sexual morality, not looking at sex as procreation as opposed to pleasure, that looking at having kids as being the be all end all, as opposed to looking at, love and some kind of weird version of like happiness being the be all end all. I think that by doing that, I hold on, I don't want to lose you. I feel like that by doing that, I've been able to center the way I look at things much differently, but still haven't been proven wrong. Like, so when people say, "Oh, this happened, and because this happened, it proves this." I'm like, "Well, that's not really the case." Like, I'm not really upset about this happening because it says clearly in the prophets that this was going to happen. Or someone says, "Oh, this is unprecedented. We've never ever accomplished that, like dealt with this anywhere in the world." Well, King Solomon said thousands of years ago, "There's nothing new under the sun." Most people don't even realize that quote came from him, and have never read. I forgot how you say it in English. Ecclesiastes, I think, is the way they say it in
Yes,
English.
yes,
But
Kohelet.
I use the Hebrew word, which
Yeah.
is koheles, right? Like most people have never read it and don't understand that he addresses all the issue of vice and sin and wealth and all of that, and he just keeps saying that over and over again. The more we focus on it, the more worthless our lives pursuit come, and that when the end comes, when whether we've made a lot of money, whether we've banged lots of broads, whether we've, had a great career, all of that, like we're all maggot food, and sooner or later it occurs to you that if you do believe in a creator, which is a fundamental tenet of Judaism, that you have to believe that there's a creator who's in charge of everything. If you believe in that, when you come to your end, how can you be comfortable knowing that your pursuits were all worldly when he didn't ask you to spend your time on just worldly pursuits? Even if he acknowledged that, yes, you would have to work for your food, and yes, that women would suffer in childbirth, and yes, that life would not be perfect. Like no one ever promised us any of that. And all of those things can be completely squared with the idea that you can still make heavenly pursuits and that you can still learn about the holiness of everything you do. That giving charity isn't just about fulfilling a mitzvah of giving charity, that giving charity is taking possibly money that was in some way dirty or worldly or just not worth it, and giving it holy purpose. When you can do those things, I don't need to examine whether the right or left are wrong. I need to understand in some way, how is this in line with what I've been taught or what I can ask or what I can learn about what do the history of my people say about this. And
So,
I 99.9% of the time find a direct answer that I'm more than comfortable with.
so when you talk
So,
about how do I taking time to figure things out, you're talking really about taking time to figure things out in alignment with Torah.
right. And I tend to find that whenever I find a pretty clear answer in Torah that this is why things like this happen, I seem to feel much more comfortable commenting on the, I don't want to say secular, but I think you know what I mean, like
Yeah,
the
it's
the
secular.
non yeah,
Secular's
the secular aspects of
perfect.
something.
Hmm.
Like people go, "Oh, Trump was sent by God." That could be. I don't I'm not arguing because I believe in a creator that controls everything on earth. Was Trump sent by God? Probably. But was he sent to save the Jewish people or to not save the Jewish people or to save the Americans or not save the Americans? How the hell would I know? I just can accept that he was sent by God. So was Kamala sent by God? Sure. He could have sent someone that was much more charismatic and much more acceptable and much more palatable to more of the country, and we could have gotten Kamala. And she could have been good for the Jewish people, bad for the Jewish people, good for the country, bad for the country. Who knows? I'm not able to square that. I'm not able to say God sent Trump and Trump did X, and because Trump did X, it's proof that God wanted Trump to be president. I think that's a syllogism that no one can address.
So
So
go ahead, finish your thought.
no, so I was saying, like, I'm perfectly comfortable knowing that when you look at the book of Esther, right? At one point, Mordecai approaches Esther and says, "You need to go talk to the king about Haman because he's going to kill all the Jewish people." And she says, "I can't." She says, "I only can go into the inner sanctum of the king when he calls for me, and he hasn't called for me in over a month. And if I do go in without permission, unless he extends his scepter and says that it's okay that I did that, I'll be murdered." Right? He'll have me put to death. And Mordecai doesn't tell her, like, "Hey, go do it. I'm telling you to do it," or "Go do it. That's what God wants from you." What he tells her is, and this is very telling, he says, God accomplishes what God wants to accomplish on this earth with or without you. So if he intends to save the Jewish people, he will do it whether you go in or not. But if you say no, I'm not going in, and he has to go another way, your name is just going to be erased from history. Because when the time came up for you to give your all and do what you needed to do, you decided not to do it. And so will you live? Probably. Will you live in the palace and die a queen? Probably. But you won't be considered a savior for your people because obviously you're not fulfilling what God wanted from you. So he's the one who's in charge. He's the one who decides, that if it's not going to be through Queen Esther, it'll be through some other way because that's what he wants to happen. So
Now,
I feel like that's the way
mhm.
now that I look at life in general. Like, okay, if Trump was intended to be president, he'll be president. And when he's president, he'll do good things or he'll do bad things, but that's dependent on God. And I can be happy that he's president because I think that I like what he says and I think that he has a better idea. And I'm exceptionally optimistic about these next 4 years with him in office. I'm exceptionally optimistic about everything. But at the same time, if Trump hadn't won, I would still understand that God was in charge and that that's what he wanted.
Now, 6 years ago, when we first started talking, there was almost no connection between what you'd studied in Torah and your views on politics. They were like two separate worlds. Is that fair?
Yeah, I'd say it's fair.
And did going through difficult times bring you back to Torah?
I would say no, because I would say that during the difficult times I was going through, I didn't turn to Torah at that point. Like I didn't say, "Wow, my life is in the crapper. I need to start learning more and praying more and all of that." In fact, I probably learned and prayed less at that point. It was when things really started getting better that I started to just open my eyes a little more like, okay, well, wait a minute. How many times in my life have I gone through a really tough time? And when I was going through it, I thought this is the worst thing that could ever happen. I can't believe that God would be so horrible to me and that my life sucks and all of that. And then it turned out that it was a method to get to a much better place, you know? Like, I always give this is the best example, but I have hundreds of them, but this is one of the best examples. When I first moved back from Israel, right, we rented a house in a very liberal Jewish community. And from the time I got there, I was uncomfortable there, and they were uncomfortable with me, right? Like, these were Hillary people, these were pro tranny people, these were like people that I did not agree with politically on anything. And they felt the same way about me. And we were renting a house from one of the guys on the board of the shul, and we were miserable there, but there was nothing much more we can do. We had only been home for a year. We didn't have much money, and like everything we had, we put into renting a house and getting on our feet and buying cars and like doing the things we needed to do for the family and paying tuition. And then there was this big event in the community where the rabbi came out. He funny enough, he came to me that morning and he told me that, like, "Are you working tonight?" And I said, "Yeah." And I told him the exact times I was working. And so he scheduled like a community meeting during the time he knew I wasn't going to be there because they were going to announce that they were going to let this guy who is becoming a woman, like, do their transition and start sitting on the woman's side and, using the female's bathroom. And funny enough, he thought that I was going to freak out about it. So he didn't want me there. And I didn't freak out about it. I just looked at it as like, okay, this is not like a place where I can stay. But somehow the whole community got one side and the other. People were going crazy, and I got a lot of the blame. And then my landlord shows up to my house and he puts a sign on the door and he says, "You have 3 months to get out. I'm selling the place." And that's all there is to it, right?
Mm-hmm.
So 3 months, so much stress, I barely slept. I was losing my mind. I went and must have seen 200 rentals to try to find a place, couldn't find anything that was even close to my price range, close to an area I could live in. Like, it just seemed like a completely hopeless endeavor. And then about 2 weeks before the 90 days was up, I went to see him. And I said, "Look, we're looking everywhere. We're doing everything we possibly can, but we can't find anything. I don't know what to do, but you just got to give me a little more time." And he basically told me to go fuck myself. And if I wasn't out in 2 weeks, then he would throw all my shit in the street. Right.
Mm-hmm.
So I did what any other human being would do in that situation. I contacted an attorney because I wanted to know, what are my rights in this situation? Because if he shows up to throw my shit in the street and I at the very least beat the crap out of him, like, what's going to happen to me, my family, my stuff? And I talked to an attorney and he said, "Oh, he's not allowed to do that. I don't even know where he got the impression that he could. That is so against the law. He can't ask you to leave. You have a contract with him. And just because he's selling it and wants you to leave, that's not even close to allowed by law." So I said, "Okay, that's great." I paid him a couple $100 and he sent a lawyer letter, right? And then my landlord, who's, by the way, a realtor, it's not like he doesn't have lawyers on staff and all of that. He writes back, "No, you have a misunderstanding of the law and you have another week before I throw all your shit out," in writing. So this attorney that I paid the $200, he said, "Give me another $200. I'll represent you until we're all done with this." Back and forth for a month. They're going at it. And the guy's like basically he's coming to my house to inspect every day to make sure that, because that's like one of the things that by his right, he's allowed to come inspect the place. And he's making my life hell. And he keeps telling my attorney that he's going to chuck me out on my ass any day now because we're being difficult and all of that. Well, I guess one of his lawyers finally sat him down and was like, "I don't think you realize how wrong you are and how much this is a liability. It would be different if he had no idea and didn't have an attorney. His attorney knows what's going on and you are screwed." Right?
Mm-hmm.
So he calls me up and he's like, "Look, maybe there were mistakes made. I still need you out." This was in July. And he said, "I still need you out September 15th. Like, because I am actually selling the place. And if I don't sell it by September 15th, the bank is going to repossess it." And he's expecting me to feel bad for him as he's telling me this, by the way. Right?
Mm-hmm.
So he's like, "What do I have to give you to get you out by September 15th?" So lawyers start negotiating. It comes down to it. I get to stay there 2 months for free until September 15th. He gives me back my deposit right away. He gives me 5 grand for moving expenses. And any damage that's been done to the place, he has to take care of himself. It's not my liability at all. Right?
Yeah.
Now I have enough money to put a down payment on a house. Now, when I was terrified about being thrown into the street, that's exactly what I did. I went and I made a down payment on the house. All these things came together perfectly. By September 15th, I'm in the house that I'm in right now that I got for a third of the price of what it's worth now. And it's been 10 years. My house has tripled in value, right?
Yeah.
How does that happen? And trust me, when I was going through it, like, I was like ready to stick my head in the oven. I was so upset. Like, how can you live as a man knowing that this guy is going to throw my children out in the street? And there's generally nothing I can seem to be doing about it.
Was your landlord Jewish?
Yeah, he was on the board of the shul.
He's on the board of your shul, and he was still being a hard ass about it.
because remember, the shul didn't like me in the first place
Right.
because I wasn't the right political stripe for them. But while I was going through it, okay, I couldn't stop thinking about, wow, this is like the end of the world. This is the worst low of my life, probably. Right? And I couldn't get over the fact that this was so horrible. And my wife was the same. The kids were like freaking out because we were on edge every 5 minutes. This guy's barging in the house all the time. We really didn't think that it could get worse than where we were. And out of it, we got the house we love in the neighborhood we loved. We were a little nervous because it was like a couple miles from the shul we really wanted to go to. But we figured, you know what? It's in a great neighborhood and we're willing to walk anyway. And then within a year, Hasidic families from Brooklyn started moving into our area. Now there's 2 shuls within 5 minutes of my house. There's 150 Jewish families in just my 10-block radius, whereas there were hardly any when we moved here. My house has tripled in value. The Jewish community has exploded, and to throw icing on the cake, that liberal shul is almost completely failed and gonna have to leave, and the Hasidic communities that have moved into that town are probably gonna buy it. So, again, at the time, I looked at this like it was the end of the world. But it turns out that in the bigger picture, God works in mysterious ways. So, no, did I increase my prayer during that time? No, I definitely didn't. I did the opposite. I sat there and cried about the fact that I was being like, treated so shitty. Like I thought I was a good person. Why was I going through such hell? Right. But
Yeah.
afterwards, you realize, like, oh, wait a minute. Like, this whole thing happened for a reason. I'm in a much better position, and let me tell you, my mortgage is half what my rent was there, and because of the way I did it, I got my mortgage at 0.75% interest. So, like, could I have asked for a better situation afterwards? So it's kind of like the more that happened, the more I realized that while God does love foxhole prayers, he wants you to turn to him when things are really bad. He also wants you to turn to him when things are really good. Like he wants you to be able to say, like, listen, I acknowledge that my life was terrible and that I probably hold some level of responsibility. Whatever I did, I wasn't doing right. But whatever I did, you came through for me in a way that I could have never possibly imagined. And therefore, I just owe you. Because even if you're going to put me through such terrible times, I know that what coming out on the other side, something amazing is going to happen. I just have to keep the faith that the reason I'm going through it is in some way to repent for something, and that when it whatever I need to go through, it's because in the end it's going to be better. And by doing that, like I find, as I said, the more that happens, like the better my life gets, the more I'm like terrified of it getting bad again. So like I find myself wanting to learn more. I find myself wanting to pray more. I find more meaning in what I'm saying. I don't look at things as repetitive. I don't look at things as not being, interesting to me. I don't look like I could read something and it's all about like how to properly balance a scale, right? Normally that wouldn't interest me at all, but I'm looking at it like, wow, even back in the times where there was next to nothing, it was still so important on how to properly gauge weights and measures as to not cheat somebody and not charge somebody interest. And like I get into it, I'm like, wow, this is like a whole new world, you
Let
know?
yeah. Let's go back to the landlord story. If you'd been non-Jewish, would the landlord treated you any differently?
I don't know. I honestly I don't know. That's something I never
Well,
contemplated.
well, well. Think about in general. Is there any different way in business that Jews will treat Jews as opposed to non-Jews? Are there any discernible patterns?
I personally have never noticed any. Like I work in a very Jewish environment right now, right?
Hmm.
And I'm definitely judged on a much higher level than any of my coworkers doing the same job. Because it's almost like if they screw up, okay, they screwed up, and whatever the company policies are towards that are the company policies. But if I screw up, not only have I violated company policy, but I've made Jewish people look bad. So it's kind of like if I wasn't Jewish, I could take advantage of the system to a certain point or get away with a certain amount of shit. And when all was said and done, I would be judged on that level. But because people are looking at me and they know that just as easy as it would be for them to let me slide because I'm Jewish on a lot of stuff, that wouldn't be good for anybody. So I'm judged more harshly than most other people in my company in a comparable position.
Okay, but let's take a typical Orthodox synagogue. There's usually going to be a reluctance to screw over your fellow congregant if your lives are intermingled with each other at the same synagogue for years. Is there not a reluctance? Isn't there usually something of a much higher degree of trust if your lives are intermingled with each other around the same synagogue?
Again, I would probably say the opposite. I would think that if the same situation happened and I wasn't Jewish in this situation, right? Then I don't think there would have been enough animosity that he would have come after me the way he did, right? It just would have probably been dealt with however he could have done it legally because he would have been more concerned about doing it in a way that he couldn't be screwed than he would in the animosity towards me because he didn't like the way I was politically involved with my community. So I think that he probably would have been a much fairer to a non-Jew than he was to me, because there was that degree of personal animosity. Like obviously he was pissed at me about, and I mean he openly told people this, that I wasn't right for the community and blah 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 blah. So he judged me on a way that blinded him almost, and came out wound up working out hella good for me, whereas I don't think he would have done that with a non-Jewish person. I think he would have just gone to the lawyers and say, I need them out, what do I do? And they would have gone letter of the law, and whatever they could have done, it wouldn't have been done with such animosity.
Okay. Let's talk about October 7th. I'll give you my view. And my view is that no nation in a similar circumstance can fully protect itself against invasion. That the normal protection from invasion is that the other party knows it will get mauled. It will get thoroughly punished. But even the United States, right, is not protecting itself in case 5,000 Mexican gang members want to rampage across the border and kill as many people in San Diego as possible. The United States is not prepared to defend that. If 5,000 hardcore Mexican fighters went over the border and just started killing and raping in San Diego, they would kill and rape as many people, if not more, than Hamas did to Israel. So no nation can afford to have standing armies at its borders ready to protect itself against this type of invasion. Pretty much every nation with contiguous borders relies on the other nation recognizing that it's going to get thoroughly punished if it were to invade. So I don't primarily blame Israel's IDF or Israel's prime minister, or I don't primarily blame Israel for the embarrassing success that Hamas enjoyed on October 7. I did initially for months, but then when time went by and I heard more perspectives like, oh yeah, no nation can afford to have a thorough standing army at its borders to protect against all these kind of contingencies. The protection that virtually all nations rely on is the threat of we will then invade you and we will destroy you if you mess with us like this. So I was sick for months after the October 7 invasion of southern Israel. I thought, how could Israel be this inept? But I've come around to a different kind of recognition that this is how nations operate. Virtually no nation can afford to keep a standing army on its borders to protect against 5,000 fighters that are intent on doing you harm. And the primary protection that nation states use in this kind of situation is that we will then invade you and we will punish you, which is exactly what Israel has done to Hamas. So that's a broad outline of how I understand the events of October 7 and the aftermath. How do you understand those events?
Okay, so you ready for another answer in the vein of the one I just said?
Sure.
I mean, again, maybe this is pissing you off. Maybe it makes sense to you. I don't know, but this is just again. I look at I look at what it says in the Torah, and I go, oh wow. Now not only does this make sense, I don't know how this didn't happen sooner, right? We look at the time leading up to October 7th. There was hideous disunity both in and outside of Israel. There was those protests against Bibi. They remember they were gonna do that. They were going to throw him out of office and throw him in prison, and people were beating each other up. And there was like almost like an existential crisis going on in Israel before October 7th, right? And we
Hmm.
learned it's this is third grade Hebrew school stuff. On Rosh Hashanah, God judges not just individuals, but He judges us as a people, right? And He writes that judgment down in the book. And then you have like about 10 days to kind of fix it, to say, okay, I'm willing to acknowledge I was a complete shit and that what we've done is completely wrong. And on Yom Kippur, I'm going to fast. I'm going to cry. I'm going to beg for forgiveness from the King of Kings to please reverse whatever shitty judgment he put in the book 10 days prior. But on last year on Yom Kippur, there was this huge story about this huge minion that had gathered for Yom Kippur davening in Dizengoff Square in Tel Aviv, which is probably one of the busiest thoroughfares in the state of Israel. Okay, and halfway through davening, a bunch of leftists got really upset with the idea that there was a separation between men and women. They disrupted the service. They kicked over the separation, and the services had to stop. Right now, it says that even if you didn't ask for perfect repentance on Yom Kippur, you still have 2 weeks after that, like till the end of Sukkot, to really like kind of try your damnedest to convince him that to please remove this judgment. And no one did. Like there were some people that said, "Oh, this whole thing was horrible. That they kicked over the mechitza. That these protests are happening. That we're burning shit and we're constantly criticizing each other and doing all this horrible shit." Like nobody really cared all that much. And then to the minute that Sukkot was over, to literally the minute October 7th happens. Like the minute that God tells us the judgment is sealed, the next year is going to happen. Literally to the minute October 7th happens. And there's been unprecedented unity since. So, can I accept that 10/7 was horrible? Absolutely. It's gut-wrenching to even think about. But at the same time, I can see that our actions have consequences, and that having those consequences being so clear to us, like he straight up says it. This is, as I said, this is third grade Hebrew school stuff of Rosh Hashanah, Yom Kippur, and Sukkot. And the fact that we ignored it and we looked to every other way other than to the King of Kings, you know, the fact that we did that shows that everything he said was right. And as I said, since then, we've destroyed Hamas, we've destroyed Gaza, we've taken out the entire leadership of Hezbollah. Iran is basically neutered, whereas they've been charging towards a nuclear weapon that they claim they're going to destroy us with, and their ineptitude is laid out for everyone to see. Right? Like it's the unity that came from it was a direct result of the disunity that caused it. And in doing so, I've seen more people turn back to religion. I've seen more people turn back towards Zionism. I've seen more people turn back to just solidarity with their own people than I think I've ever seen in my life. And so, again, events that happen now confirm to me what has been told to us all along.
Are you checking out from reality to some extent because you have a comforting story, and therefore what's real is not as important because you have a divine narrative that just puts all events into perspective.
No, it's just that I'm able to look at events and not get myself torn up in knots over the idea that something could have been done, you know, physically to stop something when I am not the one in charge of the end result. And in order to believe that there is a God, a one God in charge of everything, you can't then say, well, yeah, but he had nothing to do with that. Like if you believe that, which as I said, we're commanded to believe. I'm not checking out from reality. I just happen to see that reality conforms to what I've been taught, and my goal in all of this is to keep learning more because I want to learn more because I'm so awe-inspired by it. It's not like I just sit back and I walk into a busy street because I figure God will protect me and I won't get run over. It's just that I look at it as the crosswalks are here for a reason. So, okay, if the crosswalks are here for a reason, let me understand why they're here so I don't walk out in the middle of the street and get run over by a car. I don't see reality as any different. I just see things from the perspective that there's a creator and the creator has a plan, and by having a plan, I'm able to learn more about that plan every day, and I find that in my interpersonal relationships, in the relationships I have with other people, in the relationships I have with my kids, in the relationships I have with my business, in the relationships I have with everything, things tend to get better when that's what I focus on. So I focus on it. As I said, does it mean I know less about the election? No, I read everything that was there to read. Does it mean that I'm less happy that Trump won? No, I'm really happy that he won. Like I gave a stream the other day where I was telling people like this is a new day with him being elected. And I truly believe that. But again, I believe it's a confluence of events that present opportunity to people that if they take the time to look at it, they'll realize like what a gift it actually was.
So, to the extent that you apportion blame for October 7, I would, off the top of my head, apportion one third to Bibi, one third to the IDF, and one third to Israeli intelligence. How would you apportion blame for October 7?
100% to God. Now I just got to figure out how he used the different pieces to come together.
Well, that sure sounds like you're checking out from reality, because in the real world, you need to appropriately apportion blame for an event like that so that you can learn from it.
Of course you do. But what I'm saying is that just because God used Pharaoh to punish the Jews before the Exodus, that doesn't mean I don't blame Pharaoh. It just means that I believe that that there was a purpose to what he was doing. So, okay, let me figure out what that purpose was so that I could figure out why he was punished the way that he was. Because in the future, we might have to punish people that way again. And I don't have a problem with that. Like, okay, so was Bibi at fault? Well, obviously, someone was at fault because it wouldn't have happened otherwise. There wouldn't have needed to be this lesson otherwise. So, okay, was it Bibi? Was it intelligence? Was it the IDF? Was it foreign interference? Was it Iran? Was it all of that? All of that is fine. I am trying to figure out what was the cause of it. I'm just not willing to accept that the cause of it was not in some way divine. So if as I said, just because God used those pieces to put together the puzzle doesn't mean the puzzle still shouldn't be looked at. Like as I said, if it turns out that let's say Bibi was completely at fault, he knew about it, he figured it would help him politically, right? And so he just ignored it. And okay, so Hamas was able to invade, they killed all and raped all these people, all this horrible shit happened. Then Bibi should be held to account for it. But that doesn't change the fact that we were in a position where Bibi could do that. That was the position of everything that was moved into place, that Bibi felt the need to do that. Doesn't mean I hold him less responsible. Doesn't mean I want to find out less about why he did it. But I can accept that there was something much greater to why he was able to do it.
Okay, if I accepted the best minds in Middle East departments in America's best universities, Israel's number one security problem for the last 60 years is the lack of a Palestinian state. Like, that's the elite consensus opinion in the New York Times and among our top academics. Now, Israel's number one security problem seems to clearly be Iran, and it seems like we're in the early stages of what may very well be a 10-year war with Iran. This is a pretty big paradigm shift from the Palestinians need a state and Israel will never be secure without a Palestinian state to Israel's in the early stages of a long, painful war with Iran. And any thoughts on that change of paradigm shift?
So again, Israel itself has been claiming that since at least the Iraq invasion, but really pushing it since 2013 when Bibi flew here and gave a speech to Congress about the existential threat posed by Iran. So that narrative hasn't changed. The only thing that's changed is that how impotent Russia has proved to be. I mean, and this is something we should have learned from the past that I don't know how more people haven't learned it from the past. The entire Cold War was based on the idea that military parity between the West and Russia was generally the same. And since we had nukes anyway, like we had to give them the respect that neither side wanted to fight a war that we were going to end, that was going to end the world. Right. But as time went on and Reagan really brought this out, and after the fall of the Soviet Union, we found this out even more. Most of what Russia claimed they can do was bullshit. It was all fake. Like their missiles don't work as well as they claimed, their air defenses don't work as well as they claimed. It was all bullshit. Which is why when we put Jupiter missiles in Turkey, they went to move them into Cuba and we were able to turn them back. Yet they weren't able to turn us back. They knew that we had them beat. And we just accepted it from them. It hasn't changed since the fall of the Cold War. The all of this stuff that you hear about these fifth generation fighters and these super advanced missile defense systems that Iran now has and Syria has and Hezbollah has because Russia gave them all to them and they'd be able to take out the IDF, and IDF they said Hezbollah has 100 missiles that could hit anywhere in Israel. It was all bullshit. It's not true. And Israel has shown that quite a few times now. Iran shot 1,000 missiles at Israel and killed one person, where a missile fell out of the sky and landed on some Palestinian that was walking on the street during the attack. Israel was able to send its air force 1,500 miles into the heart of Iran, hit every single target that they planned to hit, and came back without a scratch. Like Iran is the primary threat, absolutely, because they're the ones funding all of this shit. They're the ones giving the money to Hezbollah and Hamas and all of them. They are the primary threat, but their level of deterrence was always bullshit, and it still is. And right now, if they really cared, they would have responded already to what we did after the missile barrage when we hit them with our Air Force. And they can't because we hit them in a way that let them know their oil fields, their fucking nuclear facilities, all of them are the next target if they keep this shit up. And they have gotten real quiet since then. And the added bonus is nobody sees the Palestinians or Hezbollah as any different, that they are the same threat because they're all an arm of the same evil scorpion of Iran. So do I think that paradigm shift is like world changing? No. I think that the paradigm shift was always coming. I just think that October 7th made it pretty clear.
And who would you like to see as Prime Minister of Israel, Bibi Netanyahu or someone else among those who are currently politicians?
Everyone knows that I've always said this and I will continue to say it is when I lived in Israel, I lived there for 11 years, right? I think I voted in 4 elections while I was there. Bibi was on the ballot in all 3 of them. The first one, he was on the ballot, but he wasn't on the ballot for prime minister, right? He wasn't the head of the Likud when in the first election I voted in there. I never once voted for him. I always thought he was all talk, and I have a problem with politicians that say really bombastic things and then never do anything about it. And since October 7th, I think he stepped up better than anyone could. I think that anyone else wouldn't have been able to withstand the pressure that the world has put on him and get away with it. I think he's performed amazingly since October 7th. So would I like to see him continue as prime minister? I can't imagine an alternative. Even though he's still not as right wing as I like, he's still not as religious as I like. He's a very flawed man, but I can't complain about what he's done since September 7th. I mean October 7th. So At this point, if there were an election, if I could vote in it and there were an election held tomorrow, I'd probably vote for him.
And what do you think about him dismissing Yoav Gallant as the defense minister?
I was waiting for it. You can't have people in your governing coalition, especially when you're fighting a war, who have alternative, I don't want to say loyalties, but like alternative ways of running things that they're willing to openly espouse to the people. Like I think you either have to be united or everything you do is always going to be suspect and it's going to cause the same division that caused October 7th in the first place. So I think him dismissing him was probably really good. And now that Trump won, and it turns out that Gallant's loyalties to Obama, to Biden, and to Europe were very misplaced. I think that he made the right call, and I think he's going to be proven to have made the right call.
So Bibi and Trump have both had to overcome unbelievable levels of opposition, including the full powers of the deep state. Right, the full powers of the Israeli deep state want to kick Bibi out through any means necessary,
Sure.
even if it cripples Israel in a time of war. And the American deep state has certainly tried to cripple Donald Trump and even prevent him from running for president again. Is that fair?
Yeah, I'd say that's fair.
I mean, so Bibi is going up against much of the intelligence services, much of the elite IDF, much of the media. He has an attorney general who wants to do everything possible to remove him as prime minister, and he's afraid that if he removes her as attorney general, then the secular left wing Israeli Supreme Court will somehow intervene and remove him as prime minister. So Bibi, and he's got a very tough road because he cannot say what his aims are, because his aims would be unacceptable to the Biden administration. So the Biden administration has kept, pushing him to say what his day after plans are for Gaza, but he can't say what his plans are because they're unacceptable to Biden, and so he has
If he
to
even knows
dissemble.
fully what they are.
Yeah, yeah. Any thoughts on any of this?
I think what you're saying is dead true, but I also think that that kind of shows that a person like Trump and a person like Bibi are real men when it comes time to step up to the plate. Like we're always whining, especially in America, about having real leaders or people that are willing to stand up and fight. Like that's probably the most common political line you ever hear, right? Like I'll fight for you, or I'll fight the deep state, or I'll fight this, or I'll fight that. And that's all well and good to say when your opposition is mainly political. When it's just people calling you Hitler, or calling you rotten names, or talking about how you're going to destroy the country or all of that. Like that's all well and good. But they tried to kill him. Like he was an inch away from a bullet taking his brain out. They've tried to throw him in prison. They've gone after his family. They've gone after his businesses. And he's still stepping up. Like, do you not want a man like that in charge of the country? Someone who's willing to actually fight for you? He could have easily just told them, I'm sure at any point, he could have told them, I'm not going to run again. And I want you to make all this shit go away. And I'll promise I never will. I won't even get involved in politics. I'll just retire. Right. But he didn't. He fought harder, and Bibi did basically the same thing. Like, how often since October 7th have you heard, like, oh, there's a ceasefire in the works, Bibi's going to be stopped, he's not going to be able to go into Rafah, he's not going to be able to do anything about Hezbollah, America would never approve anything against Iran, they're going to withhold weapons. Like, constantly you hear about all of the things that would make you think at any time now, Bibi's going to cuck, right? And because at any time now, Bibi's going to cuck, like, we're just waiting for the other shoe to drop, and he hasn't. Like that thing that they did with the Hezbollah pagers, that's been in place for years. And the fact that he did it, like he pulled the trigger, that's huge. Like he's restored a level of Israeli deterrence that I don't believe anyone has had ever. Maybe after 69, maybe they had that level. I mean 67, they had that level of deterrence. But it definitely hasn't been in my lifetime. And now it's there. Like, yes, I know the Arabs are still screeching on social media and stuff that like they're really winning and the world is on their side. It's not. and nobody gives a shit what they have to say. And right now, they know the cost of Jewish blood. And Bibi is responsible for that. He's the man who stepped up when we needed him to step up. Now, if it turns out he caused the situation in the first place, that's going to suck really bad. And I hope he goes to prison for the rest of his life or gets executed if that's were the case. I have a feeling it's not. I have a feeling he's the guy that was just the right man for the right job at the right time and proved what a man he is. And I think that Trump is the same way, and I think that that's why we have really good things to look forward to ahead with him too.
What do you think are Israel's chances of remaking the Middle East?
I don't know at the moment. I would love to think that I did, but I just don't. Because Gaza, let's say, for all intents and purposes, that Israel has no plan for Gaza. It's not going to reoccupy, it's not going to resettle. It's eventually going to just leave Gaza alone to whatever devices it is, whether it's going to be um, UN observers, Arab countries, the Palestinians, whatever it's going to be, Israel's not going to really be involved. It's going to take 50 years to rebuild that place, even to what the shithole it was before they flattened it. Like I don't know if he has an end game because I don't know what the end game could possibly be. I don't know how millions of people or 1.5 or 2 million or whatever estimates you want to accept. I don't know how that many people can live in a little plot of land that's completely demolished and have like just a steady plan. Do I think that means Hamas will rebuild? I would imagine it's not going to be so easy to just rebuild a terrorist army when there's no like place to live and there's no tunnels and there's no nothing. Like I would think someone's going to have to focus on like, okay, what do we do about the people now? Like, how do we deal with this? And I would think Lebanon, to some extent, is the same. They've been suffering under Hezbollah for how long? Under the fact that Iran is basically their puppet master and they have no real control over the destiny of their country. Do I think they have a plan for the day after? No, but I think that sooner or later someone's going to have to step up and think of one. So do I think it'll remake the Middle East? I think it's going to have to because the Middle East doesn't exist as it did prior to October 7th. But what that will entail, God only knows. I have no idea.
So, how long till Israel is at the same level of peace that it felt on October 6th? Like, I can't even conceive of that day. I see nothing but war on Israel's horizon.
I don't think there's nothing but war. I don't think there's anybody to wage war on Israel right now. I don't think Iran can do shit. I don't think Hezbollah can do shit. I think that they've been completely neutered. I don't think that Gaza, the Palestinians can do shit. I think that Israel is 100% in its control of its destiny right now. I don't know what that means.
Hmm. And what about the smartest Israelis staying in Israel? Because many of them surely must those with the most options, right? Men with the most options, the most likely to stray, right?
Mhm.
Like a man who's operating a modeling agency, happily married man for 25 years, but he operates a modeling agency. He is very likely to stray because he has so many opportunities because he's dealing with gorgeous young women every day. And so Israelis who are highly intelligent and have skills that they can take out of the country um, are much more likely to leave the country than those Israelis who don't have the skills that they can take out of the country and prosper. So, what level of concern are you about Israel's elite remaining in Israel to carry on the fight, while, for example, most of the Haredim seem to avoid doing their share of the fighting?
Number one, I think the Haredim issue is a non-issue. Number two, the statistics don't bear out what you're saying. The people that are leaving, and there has been like an increase in emigration, are mostly people that were there for economic reasons in the first place. Like a lot of them are just going back to European countries that they came from in the first place, or Russia, where they came from in the first place. It's almost like when you cut off the welfare to migrants, they just go back. Like the true Israelis, like the people who were born there, who have businesses there and all, they're not leaving. And they have the opportunities to, they're just not. And immigration to Israel has actually increased. So, and it's increased from Western nations, people that would be considered a net positive to the country. So I just don't see the statistics bearing out that people are leaving because they have options to leave. I think people are staying because they see that doing their part now might yield amazing dividends in the future.
And how do you say that the Haredim are a non-issue? They do not serve, by and large, in the IDF. They are not dying. It is non-Haredi Israelis who are out there dying for the country, and the Haredim overwhelmingly are avoiding taking up their places in the IDF. And how on earth do you say that's a non-issue?
Because number one, the IDF has said over and over and over again, and still says that they don't want them. They don't see their integration into the army as being something that can be done easily, and they don't see the need for their troops. What they do need is they need people to step up and do national service, which could probably be arranged somehow. But the left wing of Israel and the secular side of Israel, like the Lapids and the Labor Party and all of them, they've openly said for many, many years that their goal of bringing the Haredim into the IDF is not to have them serve, it's to secularize them. It's that it'll make them Israeli as opposed to Haredi. So if someone's coming after who you are as a person and saying that their goal is to stop you from being and stop your children from being that person, then you resist it. And they have. But there's still been record numbers of Haredim joining the army. People that feel that they do have something to contribute. And the fact that more Haredim are joining, even though they're coming out and saying all of them have to join, and we're going to draft all these people. It was a secular court that said that. Bibi doesn't want it. The IDF doesn't want it. The right wing doesn't want it because they don't see a purpose to it. In the end, I think what's going to wind up happening is you're going to see higher Haredi enlistment. I think that they're going to figure out a way that they can do it that doesn't threaten their way of life. And I think when you see it, I think you're going to see some of the most well trained, savage units that ever existed in the IDF when the Haredim actually do start integrating in a way that's acceptable to everyone, as opposed to just wanting to secularize them. So, does it lead to short term pain? Maybe. But I think that long term, it's a non issue.
And what do you expect from a Trump administration?
I expect that from day one, the Republican Senate is going to expect Trump to nominate 100 judges. And every time that list gets low, he's going to nominate 100 more of 30-year-old conservative jurists that are going to sit in those judgeships for the next 50 years. And I think that that is going to be the biggest transformation that you're going to see in this country. Look at what just the Supreme Court has done since Trump appointed those justices. We now have right to carry in every state. Roe v. Wade has been reversed to the states. There's been so many consequential decisions just by him getting a majority on the Supreme Court. And that was all Mitch McConnell did from day one when Trump served his first term. I have a feeling that they're going to do that tenfold when he takes office. And I think that that's going to literally transform America. I think he's going to start actually cutting off the welfare to illegals, and I think there'll be some level. I don't think he's going to round up millions of people and start catapulting them over the border like people seem to think. But I think he's going to cut off the welfare, and I think a lot of them will self-deport. I think he's going to go after the cartels, which I think is a good thing. I think his policies on foreign policy will be like, we'll support our allies to the extent we will, but we are not putting American soldiers at risk for Ukraine or Israel or anywhere else. I think that he's going to actually worry about cutting the size of government, which I think is a big deal. I think he's going to bring in people that have proven success, like Elon Musk, and I think he's staying away from the neocons who just led him into one disaster after another. Do I think he's going to completely change everything and be the messiah that everybody says he is? No, I don't think any human could. But I think that some of the things we're going to see over the next 4 years are going to be completely dramatically changing the country for the better.
To what extent, directly or indirectly, did your live streaming and online comments and presence affect your real life? And I'll just speak for me. For me, it's only happened at the margins that I'm aware of, right? I may have missed out on countless opportunities that I'm just blissfully unaware of, but to the extent that I've had any negative repercussions for my live streaming and online commentary over the past 6 years, it's been exceedingly marginal. Uh, How about you, to the extent you feel comfortable sharing on that?
I think I somewhat agree and somewhat disagree. I think I agree that I don't think I missed out on opportunities because I was spending my time live streaming. I think the same way about live streaming as I do spending time on Twitter or spending time on Discord or any other like basic social media platform. I think that my I'm trying to think of the right word. My negative influence from those places is that I start thinking that that's real life. And I start looking for my opportunities in that world, which isn't real. I start looking at the people that I talk to on Twitter as being like my friends when they're not my friends. The vast majority of them I've never met and probably never will, and I start looking at live streaming as like real life. Like I surround myself with people that are directed to me through an algorithm or through people that already watch me, and I surround myself with people that I agree with on 99% of things, and then it's very easy to fall into a routine of blackpilling and constantly thinking things are going to hell and unable to just enjoy real life because I'm spending so much time in an artificial reality. That being said, there are plenty of people I've met from Twitter in real life that I consider very good friends at this point. There are opportunities that have arose through social media that are very good for me. So I think that my balancing act is that I treat social media as a tool and not as a facet of my life. And I think the same thing with live streaming.
And what do you think a Trump presidency means for Israel?
I think that a Trump presidency probably means a lot of good for Israel, but not in the way that most people think. I think that Trump wants there to not be any issues where he's got to focus on Israel when he should be focusing on things that more broader American public cares about. He was able to focus on it a lot in his first term because they wouldn't let him do anything else. It was an easy win, to do something for Israel because the evangelicals and Jews and everybody would praise him for it. But again, it was a focus that he shouldn't have had in his first term. He should have been focused on domestic policy, but he didn't have a government that would work with him on anything. I think now he knows that he has a government that'll work with him. I think he's learned from his mistakes. So if Hamas acts up and Bibi goes in and crushes them, I don't think he's going to sit there and say, well, we urge restraint or, oh, we fully support them. I think he's just going to want it to be done quickly. Like, get out of the press because I have bigger shit to worry about, which is nothing but good for Israel. So do I think he'll benefit Israel? 100%. For the reasons that everyone seems to think that he'll put American boots on the ground or give them billions of dollars. I don't think any of that is going to materialize.
When I typically finish a live stream that goes more than an hour, I am typically absolutely drained. I am exhausted. What kind of toll, psychic, physical, energy, what kind of toll does live streaming take on you?
It doesn't. I don't notice anything one way or the other. I tend to get really fired up from the discussions I have, and most of the live streaming I do on my channel is I'm by myself. I don't have guests. So like I like getting my message out, like what my life is and what I'm experiencing. And usually what I do is like what we used to do back in the day is like when I live stream, I just pay attention to the chat and see what people want to hear about. And then I talk about it and I try to be as open and honest as I can. And in doing so, I find a really good sense of like it pumps me up. Like I feel like okay, the world isn't such a shithole. Like I'm pretty happy with the way things are going. I'm pretty happy with the people I talk to. So it like gets me going. Like I enjoy doing it. Whereas again, back in the day, I felt more that it was constantly a battle
Hmm. So why is it not a strain now?
because I don't care what any of these people think. I don't care about inserting myself into situations that I don't. feel is necessary. Like I used to love doing all the debates. Remember how many of the
Yes.
debates I
Yes.
did?
Yeah.
Do you think I could possibly care less anymore what any of these people say? Like I really couldn't. Like I mean, as far as I'm concerned, these people have so thoroughly embarrassed themselves over the past, 5 years that there's nothing I could do to put a further nail in the coffin. So it watching their destruction has been like kind of, you know, satisfying. But I'm talking about real world stuff. I talk about politics. I talk about economics. I talk about investing. I talk about, for some reason, all the time, I talk about relationships. People treat me like I'm the fucking right wing Dr. Phil. But um, I'm enjoying myself. And if it stops being enjoyable, if I feel like it turns into a slog or like I'm just arguing with idiots or anything like that again, I'll just stop.
Yeah, just thinking of it anecdotally, neither Andy Warski, JFRP, Richard Spencer, Nick Fuentes, uh, none of these characters seem to have gone on a trajectory that you'd want for anyone that you cared about. Now,
No.
they've achieved varying degrees of fame, but overall, these are pretty sad trajectories.
Their degrees of fame have been the same degree of when you, like, watch a video on Twitter of some guy, like, getting hit in the nuts by a skateboard. Like, it's funny for a second, but then you just go on. Like, "Oh, that sucks for him." Like, I don't take what they say seriously because they've proven themselves to be completely unserious people over the course of time, and that the entire world treats them the same way. So like the people that, oh, the Groypers, they're gaining strength, they're going and talking shit to Charlie Kirk, and they're Ben Shapiro, and they're making people look bad in public, and Kanye's with them and all that. It was all bullshit. It was all nothing. They're literally pathetic losers that can't accomplish anything in life. So their job is to sit back and talk about nonsense and lie to people for a living. I don't need to get involved. They're embarrassing themselves just fine.
Okay, anything else that you want to touch on before we wrap up for today?
No, because I originally wanted to ask you some stuff about porn, but like again, like great live stream. I don't want to get into it right now. I have to talk about it later, and
Okay.
I'd rather just kind of address it at that point. Maybe I'll have some questions for you afterwards.
Okay, so I don't know if I'm going to have any energy left because I
No,
find
no.
this
When I say
exhausting.
afterwards, I mean over the
Yeah,
next few weeks. I don't
yeah,
mean
yeah,
later tonight.
yeah. Another time. So good
Mhm.
to talk to you, Halsey.
It was fucking awesome, Luke.
Yeah,
I'm really glad to see you're still doing what you do.
thanks, man.
Okay,
I'll stay in touch with you. Take care, man.
for sure.